Let's learn how to manage file systems. The df command with the H option, H standing for human readable, is how we can take a look at the file systems that are currently mounted. Now, we're not taking a look at all of our file systems, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment using fdisk. But it's important for you to understand that you can have file systems which are attached to your computer. These would be hard drives, okay, file systems, which are attached to the computer server but are not mounted. And the fact that they're not mounted means that you cannot access them in order to pull files off, write new files to it. They're there, but they're not mounted. This would be similar to if you've used a Windows or Macintosh system where you can eject a drive. You can eject the drive, but you can leave that USB still plugged in. And so in that way, the hard disk it's physically attached in a way. It's similar. Anyway, just for those of you who are totally new to the idea of file systems, it's important to understand you can have file systems which are not mounted. And if they're not mounted, then they're not accessible until you mount them. So using df and then the H option for human readable allows you to take a look at all the file systems that are currently mounted. Now, your partitions are going to be listed as /dev/sd, and then moving in order A or B or C or D or E, and then the partition name. The dev SDA portion is actually the disk itself, and I think it's best for me to show you this. We will need root privileges, sudo fdisk space L. The L option is important there to list out our file systems. So you can almost see all of the output on the screen there. Let me scroll up so you can take a look at the very first line. Disk dev SDA. This is my primary disk. You can see above with DFH that dev SDA is in fact mounted. Dev SDA1 is mounted, and that dev SDA is my primary 120 gigabyte hard drive where I installed Ubuntu Server. So again, let this sink in. If you're new to file systems on a Linux-based system, the disk itself, the hard drive itself, is going to be dev SD and then a number, a letter, A or B or C. As we scroll down a little bit, you can see near the bottom here, disk dev SD B, which is a 320 gigabyte, 319.4 gigabyte system. And if we scroll down again, then you can see that I have another disk, dev SD C, which is a 160 gigabyte hard drive. Now, both dev SD B and dev SD C are USB hard drives that I've connected to my laptop where I installed Ubuntu Server so that I could show you some things about file systems. So the disk itself is going to be dev SD and then a letter in order. And the number after that is specifying the partition. Now, I cannot go into detail if you're not really clear on partitions. That's something you'll have to look that up on your own because that's very, very basic file system stuff. But essentially, know that you can have a hard drive and you can partition that hard drive in the same manner that you curtain off a room, you partition off a room. You can take one really big room and you can put up curtains to make it into 3 smaller rooms. In the same way, you can take a large hard drive and you can partition it. Say it's a 120 gigabyte hard drive. You can equally partition it so that you have 2 60 gigabyte hard drives. They don't have to be equal. You could partition it so that you have one partition that's 20 gigabytes and another partition that's 100 gigabytes. Those partitions here are listed with a number specifying the partition number. So dev SDB1 is the first partition on the dev SDB disk. Likewise, dev SDC1 is the first partition on the dev SDC disk. It is important that we make the distinction between the disk and the partition. So the disk is going to be, for example, dev SDB. That is the entire disk. It could have 4 partitions on it. That's the entire disk. But then your partitions would be dev SDB1, dev SDB2, dev SDB3, dev SDB4, and so on. Okay, so those are just kind of the basics there, but if you're still cloudy on this stuff, you'll need to master this before, you'll need to have a good understanding of that before we move on to messing around too much with this stuff. Okay, so using fdisk is a very simple way for you to create a simple partition. And what we will be doing here is calling up fdisk. Calling up fdisk and then calling up the disk. So sudo fdisk dev SDB. If I wanted to modify the SDC disk, I would obviously issue sudo fdisk dev SDC. Let's just take a quick look at dev SDB. We are now running fdisk, and we have the SDB disk selected. We can use M for help. This shows us our options here, but it's very intuitive. The main things you're going to be doing are deleting with the D option, deleting partitions, creating new partitions, and then writing out those changes. Anything that you do in fdisk that you do not write is not going to stick. That's a change that you're making that is not going to stick. It's not going to take effect. So you need to remember to use the W or write option there, the write command, in order to actually write those changes to the disk. So let's just take a look here at what we can do. Let's say that I want to delete dev SDB1. Selected partition is number 1. Okay, so I have selected to delete partition 1. Now that change has not taken effect, but if I write that change out using the W command, then the change has been written to the disk. And if we do sudo fdisk L, we will see that change. If you look at dev SDB, there is no longer, look for it all you want, there is no longer a dev SDB1. I deleted it. It's gone, and I wrote the changes out. Okay. If I now go back in to fdisk with dev SDB, I can select the N command, and that will create a new partition. In this case, I want to create a primary partition. That's the default, so I can either type P or I don't have to. Since it's the default, I can just hit enter. Partition number 1 is the default. Again, I can just hit enter. If you're wanting to create a partition that spans the entire disk, and that's all we're going to cover right now, all you have to do is hit enter. And hit enter again, because you're specifying the first sector and the last sector. And after this, remember that we haven't written the changes out yet. So we'll use W to write those changes out. And now we can use sudo fdisk L to see our brand new partition. There it is, dev SDB1. Now I want to show you another tool for partitioning, and this tool is particularly important if you are formatting a hard drive that is larger than 2 terabytes. We will not cover that, but there are a few quirks that come in when you're dealing with hard drives that are greater than, I believe it's 2.1 specifically, but about 2 terabytes in size. We will utilize a program, and we do need root privileges for this, called Parted. I happen to like Parted a lot, but I think fdisk is much more simple. I think Parted is more powerful, but fdisk is more simple. Opening up the Parted program, we can run the print all command, which will be the same output as if we ran sudo fdisk with the L option. However, there are a few subtle differences here. I personally think this output is a little more telling and also just a little more legible. Just by a little bit. One thing is that with fdisk L, it would tell us that the file system was Linux, where here with Parted you can see the file system is ext4. But again, the main reason I use Parted is when I'm dealing with disks which are larger than 2 terabytes. If a disk is larger than 2 terabytes, its partition table has to be GPT. instead of MS-DOS, and so instead of using fdisk, you would use parted to do that. But once in parted, you do need to remember to select a disk, since normally we call up fdisk using sudo fdisk and then the name of the disk that we want to modify. When we open parted, all file systems are at our disposal, and so we would need to select one. So dev sdc, let's say. Now I can type print, not print all, but print to just take a look at dev sdc. So I've now selected dev sdc in here, and at this point I could modify the partition here, utilizing parted instead of fdisk. Okay, there's really no reason for us to do that. I just wanted to show you parted and let you know, especially about the 2 terabyte disks, you would need to use parted. So I'm going to issue quit so we can get out of parted right now, because we've done what we need to do with fdisk. Now, fdisk by default created an ext4 file system. And let's say that we don't want an ext4 file system. What we can do is issue the mkfs command. mkfs.ext3 or ext2 or whatever kind of file system we're wanting to create. It would be redundant for us to create a new ext4 file system here, since fdisk already did that for us. So let's create an ext3 file system on dev-sdb1. If you remember, that was the partition that we created using fdisk. So it's telling us we do need sudo permissions. The root privilege is there, so we need to issue sudo, which is a good thing. It's good that only people with root privileges can create this new file system, which if we had any data on the disk would completely destroy the data. When you're dealing with file systems like this, I kind of assume that you understand what's going on here, but I do know this course is for beginners. So understand a lot of what you're doing here is really dangerous. If you're deleting partitions or things like that, data loss is a very real possibility. So understand what you're doing here as you're doing it. Now you can see this command is going to take a little bit of time, so I'll let it run and then we'll come back to continue. Our operation is complete now, so we have created that file system, and now what we can do is sudo fdisk-l. Just want to show this to you here. I think it's important for you to again see the difference here. So fdisk is going to tell us that it's a Linux file system, and of course that doesn't tell us anything different than what we knew before, even though something is different. We created an ext3 file system there where it had been ext4. So again, I like how parted's going to give you that information a little more in depth and right away without having to do any other commands or anything like that. So you can see we created an ext3 file system using mk. Let me just go ahead and exit here using sudo mkfs.ext, and then you could do 2, 3, or 4, whatever kind of file system you're wanting to create there. We did ext3 and then the disk and the partition number. So this is the disk here, and then the partition number that you're wanting to for which you're wanting to create the file system. So those are the basics using DFH to view the mounted file systems. In the next video, we'll talk about how you mount file systems, how you write file systems to the file system table, and a little bit more about utilizing file systems. But in this video, we've covered how to view the file systems which are mounted, how to use fdisk and parted to either view the partitions that we have set up or modify them using some basic commands, and then how to create a file system specifically using the mkfs command. So move on to the next video now, and we'll talk more about mounting and unmounting and get into the file system table.